Good morning and welcome to Kairos Global. This is part 2 of my conversations with Dr. Joshua Gokhavi, the former executive director of the Emmanuel Hospital Association. Morning, Joshua.
Morning.
I prefer to call you Sunil.
Yep.
You're better known by most people as Sunil, right?
Yes, I was always called that.
Okay. So, Sunil, you and I are going to talk a little bit from your own experience of directing Christian organizations and leading Emmanuel Hospital Association. Tell us a little bit about the Emmanuel Hospital Association, how it started, and what is its vision.
Well, the Emmanuel Hospital Association is a group of 20 mission hospitals situated in different parts of central and northeast India, with the aim to be able to provide ethical and good level of secondary hospital care to the poor of North India. North India mainly because it is far less developed, and more so because there is hardly any Christian presence there. So while we do medical work within the walls of a hospital, we also have community work that reaches into different villages, not only surrounding the hospital but also in fairly distant areas.
So we're talking about public health there.
That's right, with the aim to bring about a transformation not only in personal lives but also in communities.
Great.
And EHA has been through 50 years.
Oh, you're a 50-year-old organization.
Yes, that's right. And it has been a blessed journey. I was very privileged to be the head of the organization when we celebrated that 50th year mark.
Wonderful. And how many hospitals does the Emmanuel Hospital Association have in North India?
We have 20 hospitals over 9 states, and the smallest being about 25 beds, the largest close to 250.
Which is the largest hospital?
That's the Duncan Hospital in Raxaul, which is in the state of Bihar, right on the Nepal border.
So you were the medical superintendent of that hospital?
I was, yes, for a time before I was asked to take on the medical directorship, the executive directorship of the organization.
Now, what are some of the challenges facing mission hospitals in North India?
I think if we look at it from a multidimensional point, one of it is always, and this has been traditionally so, that we've always had the challenge of personnel. That means we lack adequately qualified people to be able to manage the different aspects. Of course, the medical work per se, but also in terms of administration, finance, maintenance, etc. And it's mostly homegrown people. And as medicine has developed, as rules have become more stringent, the hospitals have had difficulty in coping with those changes, because the other thing that we lack has been financial resources, where hospitals are very pressed to be able to upgrade their facilities to be able to match modern medicine as it is practiced today. But yet, in the midst of that, we see the amazing way in which God steps in and provides what is really necessary at the right time.
Sunil, I have lived and worked in North India and in Northwest India in the sticks, and one of the sadnesses I've had is the lack of successor planning.
True.
You know, why do you think that our hospitals and many of our Christian organizations in North India are not able to anticipate and prepare a second and third tier of leadership?
That's an interesting question, George. I think it has two things attached with it. One is the desire for people who are doing a good job to keep it to themselves.
Okay.
And it's very hard to be able to give up control, especially in those kind of circumstances, because many of the hospitals, the majority of them I would say, have been dependent on a person or a couple who were there for the long haul.
I call that the banyan tree syndrome. Have you seen banyan trees in India?
Yes, certainly.
Giant, mighty banyan trees.
Mhm.
They're there for a very long time, Sunil. Giant, mighty, imposing banyan trees. Once you have a giant banyan tree on your campus, that becomes the focus of the community. The problem with the banyan tree is that nothing grows under it.
Okay.
Did you understand that? Nothing grows under it because it's such an imposing tree, and its coverage, the shade covers everything. Nothing can grow under it. And then if you look carefully into the roots of the banyan tree, there were not only aerial but also ground roots, you'll find that all kinds of bats and scorpions and snakes inhabit the banyan tree because it's been there for a very long time.
You're making me feel guilty, George.
And then the problem is suddenly there's a violent storm, maybe after 50 or 70 years, once in a lifetime storm, and lightning hits the banyan tree and the banyan tree falls down and it's dead. Then we have a big problem with the carcass of the banyan tree. What do we do with the carcass? We've got to cut it down, cart all the pieces away. Then you got to lift this darn tree, excavate wherever its roots went, refill the cavity, and then make a decision you want to plant a banyan tree again. You see, the problem with this kind of leadership is it's a self-perpetuating principle of disaster.
Right.
You have such outstanding individuals who are in the job for too long. I think if you're really a good leader, it should not take you more than 10 to 12 years to do what you set out to do. And then it's time that you relocate and do all those wonderful things that you did in this place in another place.
Exactly.
And you've been given the task that in 5 years of your leadership, you should have found your replacement. And you should be training your replacement. And by the 10th year, you should have developed not only a secondary tier of leadership, but also a third line. So we're in the business of grooming leaders. The church is called to groom leaders, to multiply leaders. It doesn't say that we are called to be chief disciples and then everybody else is minor disciples. Jesus tells us to teach, equip, educate, and make disciples. We are in the business of multiplying leadership. This is the biggest problem that I found in Africa and in Asia.
Yes, but within the mission context, because they are quite remotely located, one of the real problems that we face is being able to find people who have a desire for a long-term commitment. I guess the failure of leaders has been to be able to adequately motivate. And in the midst of a busy schedule, that requires, I think, an added effort or an added focus to be able to do that.
The reason why they are so busy is because they are Mr. Omnicompetent.
Trying to be.
They're trying to be omnicompetent and doing things that they're not called to do. They haven't learned the art of delegating downwards or upwards. Most boards of Christian organizations are basically rubber stamps.
Exactly.
And so this brings me to the real problem in India and in many parts of the world, is that you have a Christian organization where the leader is the one who has the vision. You know, Sunil, the truth is that the vision is owned by the board, not the leader. The leader, the executive director, is only an employee.
Right.
It's the board that sets the vision, and it's the board that appoints someone to implement the vision. We make the terrible mistake of thinking that it's the executive director who owns the show. No, it's the board. And so boards must always remember that they are the owners of the institution. And it is their responsibility to articulate and define a vision clearly. It's not the leader or the executive. Implement the vision of the leader.
Board. Exactly.
Gallo, come inside. So, my brothers, Sunil, I want you to understand this. We who are CEOs, I've been a CEO of many organizations and I've had excellent boards. The great temptation of CEOs is to pack your board with yes men. Do you understand?
Yes.
You got to find the most competent professionals to be on your board so that they can actually guide you and hold you accountable. A board is meant to hold the CEO accountable. Here's the vision. What are your goals? Tell me, what are your goals? 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, and 1 year. Clarify your goals. Tell me, what is your strategy? I'm going to hold you accountable to your goal and to your strategy. I'm going to look at timelines. Are you with me? It's not the CEO telling the board what needs to be done. The board is not interested in what needs to be done because they're clear about the goal and the vision. It's your role in developing the plan and the strategy to implement the vision as a CEO. So remember, the ownership of an organization or an institution is solely that of the governing body, the board of directors. The CEO preferably should not be on the board of directors but serve ex officio as a CEO without a voting right.
Yes. That's how the board is set up.
And,
but unfortunately,
therefore,
as you said, they're not invested enough to be able to do
no,
this
the
kind
board
of a
is
job.
not invested.
Yes.
It's not the CEO is not.
No, I'm
the
talking about
CEO
the
is
board.
too invested because there are privileges and advantages that the CEO hopes to get from the board.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So, I always talk about clarity in board level governance. I also talk about vision without support is a recipe for disaster. So if you have a clear vision and you find the right person to do the job, you've got to ensure that challenge must be supported. I want to make sure that my CEO will succeed. I am not happy to see my CEO fail. So I will surround the CEO with mentors, coaches, guides, and the financial resources in order for him to succeed. I will tell him that he's got a 5-year window and that if he is not performing, he will be sacked. You see, most CEOs are not given that clarity that performance is ultimately what holds you to the job. If you're incompetent, you are to be fired. In order to assess incompetence, you need to have appraisal systems. The chair of the board, along with 2 other professionals, should assess the CEO to make sure that the CEO is actually doing the job, whether they have the competence required to do the job, and they need to be held accountable. So remember, challenge without support is a recipe for disaster. It's critical. Secondly, when all the support systems are in place and the CEO is not committed, the CEO is not competent, the CEO is not delivering, he needs to be removed or she needs to be removed so that we get the right person. So that brings us to the HR question. How do we find the right people for the right job? In many parts of our world, we appoint people based on nepotism.
Mm-hmm. True.
My son, my son-in-law, my grandfather, my grandson, my brother-in-law, my sister-in-law. That has no place in Christian organizations.
Well, fortunately, that's not true in EHA at least.
Good, good, good. So, calling, character, commitment. 3 C's. Calling, character, commitment. These 3 are non-negotiable. Then we are looking for competence. You see? So often our CEOs are neither competent, nor do they have the calling, nor do we see commitment, nor do we see character. This is a huge lacuna in the management task. Sunil, I want to close down in 5 minutes, but I want to pose a management issue, and that is this. How can you harness your faith to complement your expertise? And how can your expertise serve your higher priority, which is your faith in God, so that the 2 work hand in hand? If you were to turn to the book of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 5, it's fascinating that Jesus calls a bunch of fishermen to serve him.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't call rabbis, he didn't call tax collectors, he didn't call the Pharisaical movement. He called some fishermen, not very well educated, but very professional. They were professionals. Remember that story in Luke 5 where Jesus meets up with Peter, and they're all sitting on the seashore mending their nets because they just come back having not caught any fish. And Jesus first of all asks Peter, can I have the use of your boat? And of course, Jesus had come in Luke chapter 4 and healed Peter's mother-in-law. So he owed Jesus one. And he says, what do you want it to? He said, I just want to use it as a floating pulpit.
Platform.
So he's sitting there in the boat and he's teaching. But the interesting thing is that Jesus, whenever he comes into any equation, he transforms the equation. And so what we find here is that Jesus then asks Peter whether there was any fish. They hadn't caught any fish. And he says, well, let's go fishing then. Because you have an empty boat, nets, highly competent crew, and a lake full of potential. And what does Peter say? He says, Master, give me a break. We worked hard all night. We may not have caught anything, and this is not the time to catch fish. It's noontime. The fish are all having siesta. And then Peter says something very remarkable. He says, but because you say so, Lord, I will do it. Peter obeys because he recognizes that Jesus is, though he may not be professionally a fisherman, Jesus has something that he doesn't have. Because you say so, then Jesus says, launch out into the deep. Cast your nets and launch out into the deep. It's incredible what happens when we obey God and trust God with our faith. The realm of the supernatural and the miraculous comes into play. It's almost as if every living creature in the Sea of Galilee is given an imperial cosmic command. Assemble before the presence of King Jesus. And suddenly you see this huge swarm of fish that are all swimming towards Peter's boat and jumping into the nets. And if you have the eye and the vision of a cartoonist, it's almost saying, here am I, Lord, use me. If I was a cartoonist, I would say, God Almighty. Now, what's going on? Peter, who is the fisherman, is the one who first says, darn it, why are you so inconvenient? These are his thoughts in his mind. Don't you know we are professional fishermen? We know when the fish are there and when they are sleeping. But he says, because you say so, I'll do it. But now, when he sees all the fish jumping into the nets and even into the boat, his eyes are wide open. Because he now becomes aware of the presence of God and the power of God. And what does Peter do? He falls on his knees and he says something remarkable. "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." How did Peter the fisherman suddenly introduce religious language into the boat, into the workplace? "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." It's the presence of Jesus. It's the presence of God. It's your faith. When it comes into your professional arena of expertise, suddenly your professional competence explodes into the impossible realm. Things that you thought were impossible become possible. This is why today, just for this session, I want to talk about how God makes the impossible possible, because we have learned the secret of harnessing our faith into the areas and arenas of our competence. Most people serve God in the arenas of their incompetence. In other words, where I'm weak, where I'm not able to do things, I ask God for help. But in the arenas of my expertise and in my competence, I don't need God. I can do things all on my own.
Or we think we can.
That's right. And that's why Peter says, give me a break, Lord. We've been fishing here all night long. We haven't caught anything. But when Jesus says, dare to believe, he says, Lord, because you say so, I will do it. And when he obeys, he experiences the abundance of God. I'm going to stop here, Sunil, because we've got to go and do other things now. But God bless you. We will have these kinds of conversations on Kairos Global where management and faith coincide, and governance principles need to be explored further. So, Sunil, it's great to have you, and thank you for your expertise and your faith and your commitment. God bless you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, George. Lovely being here and lovely talking about these things, which really are very relevant to today's context.
Yes. Bye-bye.